there's so much more beyond just the written text. Is a code. The Torah is described as a song. We sing the Torah in the synagogues. We chant the Torah. We sing the Torah. It has actual musical notes. And so it's a song. It's a song of creation. And it's also a code. And we say that everything, there's a rabbinic teaching that says, "Afochba v'afochba decholaba." You turn it over and turn it over because everything is in it. And you can even find yourself in it. Every person can find where they are in the Torah if you know exactly where to look and how to look.
Welcome to Get Yourself Optimized, a podcast full of secret knowledge that will enable you to reboot and 10x your life. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer, author, speaker, online marketer, serial entrepreneur, coach, and a real geek when it comes to biohacking, life hacking, and lifestyle design.
Ancient Hebrew texts, including, of course, the Bible itself, contain many secrets and obscured wisdom, including mathematical codes and hidden patterns that have been preserved across millennia. Efraim Palvanov, my guest on today's show, is a highly sought-after Torah educator, celebrated for his unique blend of scholarly depth and engaging delivery. He's an author of 5 books and a popular Jewish YouTuber who brings a distinctive perspective enriched by his extensive scientific background. In our conversation, we explore the mystical foundations of Kabbalah as an essential source for divine guidance. Efraim examines the mathematical precision embedded in the Torah through Gematria and hidden letter patterns. He reveals how reincarnation operates as a fundamental Jewish principle, connecting ancient figures like Jacob or Jacob and Esau or Esau to historical relationships between Jewish and Christian civilizations. Efraim shares fascinating examples of biblical codes, from the equidistant letter sequences spelling Torah to the numerical relationships that unlock deeper meanings in Scripture. We examine consciousness levels across all creation, from inanimate matter to celestial bodies, and address humanity's unique role as we face unprecedented technological transformation. This is a fascinating discussion about how spiritual wisdom has been encoded and preserved across centuries. So without any further ado, on with the show. Effie, it's so great to have you on the show.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So we talked before the recording here that I'm a fan. I've listened to a number of your classes. You have 3.9 million views on your YouTube channel. You're quite a star on YouTube. And I'd love for our listener to first just get a sense of who you are, what your origin story is, how you got to be where you're at now.
Sure. Origin story: born in the USSR, spent the first half of my youth in Israel, the second half in Canada, and grew up traditional, not religious, mostly secular, but traditional Sephardic. You know, most Sephardis are kind of traditional growing up. And when I was about 14 years old, I started learning, kind of got into Torah learning. And since then, I've been learning as much as I can, learning about the spiritual world, learning about other religions. It took a number of years. I actually didn't become religious until I was about 20 years old, actually on my 20th birthday. And that's when I fully took upon myself to plunge into this, to dive into it and take on that path. And so it was many years of learning. And meanwhile, also did a lot of training in science and multiple degrees, science-related degrees, starting with one in biomedical science, and worked as a medic for a couple of years, served in the Canadian Army as a medic as well. And then eventually, also started writing some books, and the YouTube channel came out really by accident, just because of COVID times and not being able to meet in person. And I decided to just put some of the recordings of classes on YouTube. Never thought anything would come out of it, but within a year or two, it kind of exploded, thank God. So that's what I do. I try to share God's word with the world, with whoever's interested and wants to listen, and kind of make sense of our very complex reality.
Yeah, and you touch on Kabbalistic concepts. So Kabbalah is part of what you speak about and teach. I'd love to hear what you see, how you see Kabbalah being the mystical part of Judaism, and maybe what it isn't.
Right. So Kabbalah is really just, it's become like this kind of catchphrase for anything, and people misuse the term very often. But Kabbalah literally just means reception, receiving. The root of the word really just means receiving. Actually, in ancient Jewish texts, like in the Talmud, when it says that we have something by Kabbalah, through Kabbalah, it's actually just saying we have it from the prophets, from the Nevi'im, that part of the Tanakh, that part of the Bible that records the sayings of the prophets. And so that's actually what Kabbalah originally meant. It actually just meant what we have by tradition from our ancient prophets, from the biblical prophets. And Kabbalah literally means reception. The metaphor that I like to use is like a receiver. A Kabbalist is a receiver. And what is a receiver? Like a radio receiver. The metaphor of a radio receiver, the room that I'm sitting in right now and the room that you're sitting in right now is probably quiet and you don't hear any music. But the truth is, it's full of music, and there's music all around you, literal music, and you just can't hear it because your ears are not able to pick up those radio frequencies. But if you have a radio receiver and you just tune it, you turn it on, you tune it, now you hear the music. So I think being a Kabbalist is the same. It literally means being a receiver. It's like being a radio receiver and tuning into frequencies that are kind of invisible, but are definitely there, and just tapping into that kind of godliness. So that's basically what Kabbalah is in a nutshell. It's Jewish mysticism. It's understanding the cosmos. Historically, it was divided into two categories. One was called Ma'aseh Bereshit, the act of creation, the account of creation, which is understanding the cosmos, the foundations of the cosmos, what the universe is built on, how God created the universe. And that's one half. And the other half is called Ma'aseh Merkava, the divine chariot, the account of the chariot. And that's all about understanding essentially prophecy and our relationship with God and our relationship to the universe at large. And Ma'aseh Bereshit is really based on Genesis, and Ma'aseh Merkava is based on Ezekiel, the book of Ezekiel, which starts with Ezekiel's vision of this divine chariot, which is a theme throughout the Bible, throughout the Tanakh. Right? Isaiah saw the chariot, Daniel saw the chariot, Elijah saw the chariot, and all the Israelites at Mount Sinai saw the chariot. And so on. So there's this theme of the divine chariot. So those are historically the two aspects of Kabbalah. And last thing I'll say on that is that we talk about studying God's word, studying the Tanakh, the Bible. We do it on 4 levels. And the acronym for it is Pardes. Pardes means paradise. It's the root of the English word paradise. A Pardes in Hebrew means an orchard, like a fruit orchard, like a field, a garden. And so our sages said, learning Torah, you have to enter the orchard, enter the Pardes. And Pardes is an acronym that stands for, the P stands for Pshat, which is just a simple understanding of the text. And then Remez, the R is Remez, which is going a little bit deeper and getting like, what is the text trying to teach me? And then Drash is metaphorical, allegorical. And finally, the S of Pardes is Sod, which means secrets. And Kabbalah is essentially concerned with the secrets of Torah, the secrets of the Bible. That's all that Kabbalah is.
And when you say secrets, I mean, there are literal secrets in the text, hidden in Gematria, which are numerical associations with the letters that when you add them up or you do different kinds of calculations, you get relationships between different key terms and key themes in the Bible. There are secrets in the way that the letters are written, with the little dots and the crowns on the letters and so forth. Like, these are all meaningful, and there's hidden secret knowledge embedded in those. And I believe that part of the reason for that is so that when the text gets intercepted by the enemy who wants to destroy Judaism, in like Roman times and so forth, that they couldn't use everything that was there against the Jews because a lot of it was in code, essentially. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think that's part of it. I think it's partly because the Torah is meant to be something alive. It's a living document. It's not a reference textbook that you can keep on the shelf and that anybody can look up and get that's not the point of it. The Torah is a living text, and it's meant to be studied and even argued over. That's really important in Jewish tradition. That's really what the Talmud is all about. It's about trying to make sense, bring the text to life. And so we have this idea of an oral Torah, an oral tradition that goes alongside the written Torah, that goes back all the way back to Mount Sinai and to Moses. When Moses brought the physical Torah, wrote the physical Torah, there was also, of course, oral teachings that went along with that, which is normal. Like, that's true. I'm a teacher. So when in a classroom, we don't just read the textbook and that's it. The textbook is really just, I hardly ever even use the textbook. Truly, I don't require my students to get the textbook, because it's not really about the text. It's about the actual learning, engaging in conversation and debate and experiencing the learning directly. And it's the same thing with the Torah. It's not meant to just be a textbook that anybody can look up, and it's meant to be alive, and it's something that we have to debate and discuss and interpret and reinterpret. And so we have also oral traditions that have been passed down, going back to Sinai, even before Sinai, going all the way back to Abraham, and even before that, going back to Adam. We have traditions of certain teachings going all the way back to Adam. And so the Torah has there's so much more beyond just the written text. And the Torah is a code. The Torah is described as a song. We sing the Torah in the synagogues. We chant the Torah. We sing the Torah. It has actual musical notes. And so it's a song. It's a song of creation. And it's also a code. And we say that everything, there's a rabbinic teaching that says, "Afochba v'afochba decholaba." You turn it over and turn it over because everything is in it. And you can even find yourself in it. Every person can find where they are in the Torah, if you know exactly where to look and how to look. And yes, the Torah has this perfect mathematical precision. It's actually incredible. And some people think Gematria, which is like Jewish numerology, they think it's all made up, and you can find anything and find any like number pattern or make up all kinds of numerical, correspondences and coincidences. But that's a big mistake, because we live in a universe at large. The whole cosmos is very deeply mathematical. That's something that we have to understand. The whole cosmos is built on math. Why is the universe so mathematical? Why is it that we can describe everything with a formula? Why is it that we can put a number on anything? We can predict wind patterns. We can predict the motions of distant galaxies and planets, anything, right? Why is it? Why I can calculate the exact number of molecules of water in a cup of water, and I make my students do it all the time, right? It's just basic, like grade 11 chemistry. So, and you have a background in that as well, right? Why is the universe so perfectly mathematical? And for scientists and in the philosophy of science, that's a big question. Like, it didn't have to be this way. It didn't have to be that the universe is so perfectly fine-tuned. We live in this fine-tuned mathematical universe where everything, it has some numerical equation. And so the Torah is the same. The Torah, again, is just like the blueprint for the cosmos. And the Torah, just like the cosmos, the Torah is perfectly mathematical. There are incredible numerical relationships. And in Hebrew, traditionally, Hebrew had no numbers. The letters were numbers. So the first letter, Aleph, is 1 and Bet is 2. And to this day, we use letters as numbers. And so the whole Torah is really a numerical code with incredible numerical correspondences and formulas, both physical and spiritual formulas as well.
There's one code that keeps repeating apparently in the first is it in the first book in Genesis and Bereshit, or does it spill over into the next several books? I forget, but every certain number of characters, there's this repeating sequence. It's like a watermark essentially.
Yeah.
Yes,
there are such.
Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah. So there is a whole separate from Gematria, actually. Gematria is where the words have a numerical value, where the letters have a numerical value. There's a separate thing called dilug. Dilug literally means skipping. And some people call it ELS, equidistant letter skips. So that's where you will look at, you will find words that come out of skipping a certain number of letters. Like every 3 letters, you get a certain word will emerge, or every 4 letters, every 5 letters. So today they use computers to do like these very complex ELS codes. So that's not really part of ancient Jewish tradition because it's impossible to do without a computer. But in ancient Jewish tradition, what we do have is dilug, which is skipping every certain number of letters. Right? So you'll find that if you count, for example, in Genesis from the first letter Taf, if you count every 50 letters, you will get the word Torah. And in the second book of the Torah as well, in Exodus, if you count from the first letter Taf, if you count every 50 letters, again, it spells out Torah, right? So you have patterns like that. And from the last two books, if you count from the end, you count from the last letter Taf, you count 50 letters, it spells Torah. And the fourth book in Numbers, Bamidbar, the book of Numbers, you count from the last Taf, you count 50 letters, and you get Torah. So there is that, right? There are very interesting like ELS, like equidistant letters.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's mind-blowing. And
Right.
yeah.
So separate from Gematria, right? I'm a big fan of the Gematria, of the actual, looking at the actual numbers in the Torah. Some people like to use the ELS method, which is looking at skips. There's many people who criticize it. I've been critical of it myself sometimes, because if you have a very big text and you have a very long skip, then indeed you might be able to find all kinds of things. So the traditional way of doing it is not to use massive skips. It's like just doing it very short. What's humanly possible? Like if it needs a computer, then that already starts to get complicated, and people do end up finding all kinds of things. Not just in the Torah, but even in a book like Moby Dick or whatever, anything that's very long, you can find. If your book is long enough, if the text is long enough and the skip is long enough, then yeah, you might find all kinds of things that aren't really true. So you got to keep
now certain prayers in Judaism, in the Hebrew, the first letter of each line spells out the author's name.
Right. Yes. So that you will find as well, which is like a notarikon, of like an acronym or an acrostic. That's very popular for sure in Judaism. Many of the songs, many of the piyutim, various poems and prayers do have an acrostic where each verse begins, and it's in the Bible itself, in the book of Psalms. There are many psalms that go by in order of the Hebrew alphabet, right? So like each verse will start, the first one with an aleph and the second one with a bet and the gimel and dalet, and it goes in alphabetical order, and each verse begins with a letter in order of the Hebrew alphabet.
Yeah. Now, so that makes it very, very important for the text to be kept exact. So in the written Torah, you cannot paraphrase, you cannot make any mistakes. If there's one little tiny error in a mezuzah scroll, that scroll is not usable. You cannot hang it on the doorpost.
Exactly.
And if you compare the versions of different books, like the book of Isaiah, you'll see no changes. 1,000 years go by and there have been no changes to it. It's been kept with absolute precision. I remember seeing a clip about this. Wes Hoff was on Joe Rogan's podcast talking about the integrity of the Isaiah scroll, that they hadn't found anything earlier on the book of Isaiah since the Middle Ages. Like, I don't know. Basically, when they found the Dead Sea Scrolls, they were able to go back an extra 1,000 years and find that the book was kept with integrity and precision. That's amazing. And
the differences are minimal and basically insignificant. Yeah. And especially with the Torah itself, with the 5 books of Moses, which the Jewish sages and scribes throughout history were particularly careful to transmit the actual 5 books. That's what's the most holy, the Torah of Moses. So those 5 for sure maintain an incredible integrity.
Yeah. And also the oral Torah, which I understand was also given to Moses on Mount Sinai, not just the written Torah, but the oral Torah. And then the Jews had to retain that, memorize that, again, with precision for many, many hundreds of years, until finally, at the risk of extinction, it was written down. And then it was maintained with the same level of precision that you can't make mistakes, you can't paraphrase, you can't lose any of the integrity of things like the Gematria and the other secrets that are embedded in these texts.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are so many secrets embedded. Again, even in the Mishnah, which is the first actual formulation of the oral laws that were written down in the 2nd century of the Common Era, because of, again, the threat of Roman obliteration of Judaism at the time. And so Rabbi Yehuda Nasi took upon himself, among his companions, to record the oral laws. And so that was the Mishnah, and then after that, the Talmud, which really is a record of debates over the Mishnah and how to properly understand them. But in both, you have embedded many incredible secrets, and it's much deeper than what the surface text actually says. And it was done that way deliberately. It's like a puzzle that you have to piece together, and that's part of the fun of learning it. I mean, it's meant to be actually a very engaging experience of learning it and breaking apart the text and trying to make sense of this puzzle, right? Sometimes people will say that the Talmud is like the first hyperlinked text, because it's cross-referenced to everything. It cross-references scripture, it cross-references Mishnahs and other sources, and Midrash, which is a whole other area. Midrash is all of this not non-legal narratives that were passed down by oral tradition and that fill in a lot of the missing details from scripture. And so the Talmud like hyperlinks and combines and integrates all of these, and it's an incredible experience to actually learn and understand it, and to be able to integrate all of these aspects. Part of the fun of it, right? Of creating this web in your mind, and it all starts to crystallize and make sense, right? God's word really starts to make sense.
And it's not just the rules, the decrees, the mitzvot, the mitzvahs that have to be kept by the Jews. It is so rich with allegory and with meaning. And when you use some of these decoding devices, such as the Gematria, I love the example that you shared in one of your classes about why Jacob, did not kill his brother Esau, because he needed to make peace with him. And the reason you are able to tease that out, and why he needed to make peace and not just kill him, because he certainly had the right to. He was being pursued. His life was in danger. Esau was going to kill him if he could. But you decoded that, you unpacked that in the class, explaining it through Gematria, how this rectification of Esau by bringing peace between them would help kind of rebuild, rectify the world, tikkun olam. So could you elaborate a bit more on that? Because I probably butchered that pretty badly.
I think that the key elements are there. It's important to clarify that I don't think Jacob ever intended to kill Esau. Okay, so we don't have any indication that Jacob had a desire to kill him. The other way, right? The Torah says that Esau wanted to kill Jacob because he was so mad at him for taking his birthright and his blessing. And Esau pursued Jacob. But Jacob never wanted to kill Esau. On the contrary, he wanted to make peace, and they did. And so what one of the great rabbis, the Baal HaTurim, points out is that the numerical value of the word Esau, of the name Ayin Shin Vav, is 376, which is the same value as Shalom, of peace. Peace is also 376. So the Baal HaTurim points out that ultimately, there will be peace between Jacob and Esau, right? That these brothers will reunite and be able to dwell together and live together as God intended, because they're originally, if you remember the story, their mother Rebecca was pregnant, and the Torah says that there was like a battle in her womb, and one ended up being born, Esau, born very ruddy, and he was born very hairy and muscular, like a little man. That's what Esau means, that he was like born complete. And the other, Yaakov, was smooth and was smaller, and he was called Yaakov from the word heel, because he was grasping onto the heel of his brother. And so Yaakov is like described as this very innocent, meek child, and Esau is like this really strong red man. And so they were supposed to work together to rectify the world, to do God's work. Esau had the blessing to do it in a physical way. He was given physical powers, and Yaakov was given the spiritual powers. Yaakov would be like the educator, the teacher, the rabbi, and Esau could be the warrior, because you have to bring light into the world, but you also have to confront darkness. You also have to build. You also do physical things, And unfortunately, Esau couldn't really contain those physical blessings, and he fell into sin. And Yaakov tried to take on that birthright, that mission of Esau unto himself. And Esau later on regretted abandoning his birthright and his mission. And so the idea is that in the end of days, eventually Yaakov and Esau will reunite, will make peace, and will finally fulfill their mission of working together to make the world a better place, to rectify the whole world, to transform the world into a godly kingdom, as God intended.
Yeah. And will that be where they're reincarnated and have material bodies, or will that be in the spiritual and the non-physical? Like, how will that occur?
Yeah. I think we see it as Yaakov representing the entire Jewish people, and Esau representing, also called Edom, representing in Jewish tradition the whole kind of Western world, the Christian world, the European world. And generally, we see the Yaakov-Esau relationship as symbolizing the Jewish-Christian relationship, where we're like brothers, really, and we come from a common source. Christianity is built on Jesus, who was a Jew, but yet over history we've separated so far. But the idea is that one day we'll come back and make peace again. And this idea of Esau pursuing Jacob all the time and wanting to kill Jacob, for Jews, it was always seen like that's why Christians have throughout history, for most of history, oppressed Jews. And there's been a lot of Christian persecution of Jews throughout history, whether it's the Crusades, whether it's the Inquisitions, whether it's the pogroms, even, of course, culminating in the Holocaust. And so in Jewish tradition, we see that starting from the Roman Empire and continuing to the last century, that very difficult Jewish-Christian relationship as the Jacob-Esau relationship. And at the same time, also having good relations, right? Jewish-Christian history has not always been terrible. It's kind of like a roller coaster. There are good times, there are bad times. There are times when we really get along and we help each other and we support each other. And you see that today. A lot of the big supporters of Israel today are Christians, evangelical Christians and other Christians who are big supporters. And throughout history, not just today. In European history, there were times when Jews were a protected people, that European kings were good kings and tried to protect Jews, and vice versa. And they were the bad kings that expelled the Jews and that persecuted the Jews. So this kind of almost like this love-hate relationship, we see that in Jacob and Esau first. And so in Jewish tradition, that Jacob and Esau relationship has always been seen as a model or a metaphor for the Jewish-Christian relationship throughout history. And I think the fact that it's getting better now, that in recent decades, we've gone so much closer, including the Catholic Church moving away from its previous beliefs. John Paul II, he's in the Second Vatican Council, they moved away from a lot of the kind of anti-Semitism that was embedded in Catholic beliefs. And I think that's also part of the reconciliation at the end of days between Jacob and Esau. So is the Christian Zionist movement and the evangelical Christians. I think it's all part of this prophesied statement that Jacob and Esau will make peace at the end of days and will work together to recreate a better world, to create a godly world. And we're seeing it now, because kind of like when we look at morally, spiritually, where the world is lining up, it's like the Judeo-Christian values, the Judeo-Christian world versus various other ideologies. And we find that certainly Orthodox Jews in particular have a lot in common with our Christian brothers, because we ultimately are Jacob and Esau, right? We come from, we're originally brothers. And so we need to reconcile. And only if we work together, if we can put aside some of our differences and work together, we can make the perfect world, the godly world that we want.
Yeah, I love that. And one of my favorite examples of Yaakov Esau relationship is Emperor Marcus Aurelius. One of his best friends was Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi.
Judah the Prince, a rabbi of such incredible wisdom and righteousness, and they were just really great friends. Marcus relied on him for a lot of advice on how to run the Roman Empire. I remember one story. He sent one of his soldiers or servants to the rabbi for advice about the coffers. The Roman coffers were empty, and so the rabbi's coded message was not to actually say anything, but in front of the messenger, he went to the garden and pulled out some of the plants and put other plants in its place. And Marcus was wise enough to understand what that meant. When the messenger came back and explained what happened, that he didn't actually give an answer. All he did was do this weird thing in the garden. He knew to replace some of his trusted advisors. And sure enough, the coffers started filling up. So some of his most trusted inner circle were stealing from the Roman Empire.
Yeah, absolutely. We know that Marcus Aurelius was one of the great Roman philosopher kings, and of course wrote a number of philosophical works and meditations called. And Rabbi Yehuda Nasi was a good friend of his. So the Talmud calls him, and the Midrash calls him Antoninus. So, and Marcus Aurelius, his full name was Marcus Aurelius Antoninus. So it's believed that it's the same, one and the same person. There's so many great stories about Rabbi Yehuda and Marcus Aurelius or Antoninus, and that they helped each other as well. Marcus Aurelius asks Rabbi Yehuda many questions about Judaism. He asks him about reward and punishment. He asks him about various things, about the Sabbath, and Rabbi Yehuda answers him, and they develop this really close relationship. And there is an understanding from a Kabbalistic perspective that they actually were the reincarnations of Jacob and Esau. That Rabbi Yehuda Nasi was the actual physical, the reincarnation in the soul and the body of Jacob, soul in a new body, and Marcus Aurelius of the soul of Esau in the body of the Roman emperor, right? Which, again, the Roman Empire in Jewish tradition is Esau, is the empire of Esau, of Edom. And so there is such an understanding that Rabbi Yehuda and Marcus Aurelius were the reincarnations of Jacob and Esau, and a fulfillment of that, a rectification of that, where they actually did make peace and respect each other and work together.
Yeah. I love the classes you've taught on Edom. And for our listener or viewer who's not familiar with that term, Edom, where is that in the biblical text, and how do we know that that refers to like the Roman Empire and the Western world after the Roman Empire fell?
So Esau is called Edom, right? He's called the Red One. Edom means the Red One. And because he sold his birthright for a pot of red stew, the Torah says that he was nicknamed the Red One. Also because he was born red, because he was redheaded and he was born red. So 2 reasons. He was called Edom, the Red One. And in Jewish tradition, for a variety of different reasons, Edom became affiliated with the Roman Empire. So what those reasons are, I gave a 5-part series. It's all on YouTube. There's a series called Understanding Edom. And over the 5 videos, I gave many different explanations and reasons for how Edom became associated with Rome. One reason is because Edom was the Roman province of Idumea as well. And the king, Judea had a king from Idumea who was the infamous King Herod. And King Herod was a Roman client king. He was the king of Judea, but he was appointed by the Romans, by the Roman Senate. And he was despised, universally despised by all the Judeans. And he was seen as the symbol of Roman oppression. And he slaughtered many rabbis and many Jewish figures at the time. And so because he was associated with Rome, he was the Roman client king. And he was an Idumean. He was an actual descendant of Esau. He was physically from Edom. And the Judeans never accepted him as a legitimate king. He was the fake foreign Edomite Roman king. And so I believe, and I've made this case in one of my books and in the videos, that that's when that relationship was solidified. That connection between Rome and Edom, I believe it comes back to Herod. Because for the Judeans 2,000 years ago, Herod was the symbol of the oppressor, the Roman Empire, that's making our lives miserable. And so he is that Esau that's oppressing Jacob. And so I think that's really where that relationship truly crystallized, through Herod. But there are other explanations, and we have, again, oral traditions, midrashim, that talk about other reasons for why Edom became associated with Rome, including that in the genealogy given in the Torah in Genesis in chapter 36, where it lists Esau's descendants, there are a number of descendants there that, according to oral tradition, those people left Israel, ancient Israel, and moved to Rome. One of the descendants of Esau is called Irom. That's actually his name. He's called Rome, essentially. And so there's a rabbinic tradition that that's actually referring to one of the founders of Rome. And there's another tradition that another one of the descendants, who's called Zipho, also ended up, by way of Egypt, ended up in Italy. And so we have evidence and oral traditions that a number of Esau's descendants ended up in Italy or in Rome. And so there is a genealogical relationship there. And plus the larger political relationship of Herod being an Edomite, an Idumean, and representing the Romans. So many different reasons. So for whoever's interested, they can listen to that series on YouTube just to explore that development of how Edom became associated with the Roman Empire. And because of that, the whole European world, and because the Roman Empire became Christian, ultimately the Romans became Catholic. Sometimes Christians don't like to be called, a lot of Protestant Christians don't like when I lump together all Christians. So the Roman Empire, the Catholic Roman Empire, once the Roman Empire became Christian, Catholic, that relationship between Edom being the Christian world was solidified.
Yeah, this is so fascinating. In the concept of reincarnation in the Christian Bible seems to be really either removed or downplayed to such a point that most Christians would not say that they believe in reincarnation, but it's a foundational part of Judaism.
Right.
I don't know that that's common knowledge that that reincarnation isn't like just a Hindu thing, it's a Jewish thing.
No, right. It's definitely a Jewish thing. And once you understand that, when you actually start reading the Torah, the whole Tanakh, the Bible, with the glasses of reincarnation, everything starts to make perfect sense. So I have many listeners who are Christian. I get emails and comments from Christians all the time. A lot of them do say that, no, reincarnation is false. It's not compatible with scripture. And others will say, no, it's quite true. Those who have actually understood it will say, no, the Christian general view is wrong about this, and that reincarnation is certainly a thing. And again, once a person understands reincarnation, what it actually is and the mechanisms behind it and how it works, it's very hard to deny it. I mean, it's pretty clear that there's a common thread throughout scripture of people reincarnating, coming back. And we have a number of Jewish holy texts that actually go into all of reincarnation and the mechanisms of reincarnation. I've spoken a lot about it. Again, there's a 3-part series on my YouTube channel specifically about reincarnation. And what
we'll
the biblical
all that in the show notes for this episode too. So.
Thank you. Yeah. So and there's biblical sources for it. Actually, if you understand, there's a number of verses in Job, in the Torah itself, in the book of Exodus, that clearly imply that there's reincarnation. And when you look at, for example, the way the Arizal, who was one of the great Kabbalists of history, lived about 500 years ago, the Arizal taught his teachings on reincarnation were recorded in a book called Shala Gilgulim, the Gate of Reincarnations. And it's absolutely fascinating. And one of his later disciples also wrote a book called Sefer Gilgulei Neshamot, the Book of Reincarnations. And it goes in alphabetical order. Each chapter is like one letter, and it basically tells you, like, Aleph, okay, all the people whose name starts with an Aleph and in the Bible, and they were the reincarnations of, and then Bet, and then Gimel, and then it goes through like hundreds of different figures, and who they were the reincarnations of and why. and it explains so many stories that are absolutely bizarre and otherwise inexplicable. Like without reincarnation, you can't really explain so much of what's going on in the Torah. Why did this person do this strange thing? Why did this great figure do this? Why did King David do this? Why did Moses do this? It's only really through the lens of reincarnation that it all starts to make sense.
Yeah. And also on the side of the evil, where just this bizarre hatred, out of context hatred for the Jews. I believe that I've heard somewhere that Hitler was a reincarnation of the Pharaoh that persecuted the Jews when they were enslaved. And yeah.
It's possible. I don't know. I can't speculate on that. But it's possible. There is a Zohar. The Zohar is like one of the main textbooks of Kabbalah, of Jewish mysticism. It was first published in the 13th century, but it dates back to the 2nd century CE, again, to the time when a lot of these Jewish oral teachings were first written down during the Roman Empire in the 2nd century. And so the Zohar has this beautiful prophecy that says that in the end of days, a lot of the ancient oppressors of Israel would reincarnate, would come back into the world, and God would punish them once more, and there would be retribution upon them again. And it names a lot of these wicked oppressors. It names one of them is Nebuchadnezzar, right? Nebuchadnezzar, who destroyed the first Jerusalem temple and slaughtered many Jews and exiled the rest to Babylon. And what's amazing is we saw that prophecy fulfilled in our days, because we had the story of Saddam Hussein. And amazingly, Saddam Hussein called himself the reincarnation of Nebuchadnezzar. Like he said it openly. People didn't take him seriously. But Saddam Hussein believed he was the reincarnation of Nebuchadnezzar. He minted coins superimposing his face on Nebuchadnezzar's. He built his palace on top of the ruins, right above the ruins of the old palace of Nebuchadnezzar. He had himself engraved into the old archaeological remains from Nebuchadnezzar's time. Like he fully believed that he was the modern Nebuchadnezzar, and that he was this like indestructible, great leader. And you remember at one point
on this, and you had pictures and everything in your
right, exactly. It's indisputable. And at one point, remember, he had the 4th largest army in the world. He was a superpower at one point, very wealthy from all the oil, and he had met a very terrible end. And so it's amazing that the Zohar says that you'll see that a day will come when Nebuchadnezzar will be reborn. He'll come back, and he will be destroyed one last time as a final punishment. So yeah, that's another one of these examples of reincarnation that we kind of see in our own days.
Yeah. And I'm curious why you think that in the movie The Matrix, which I know you like, it's one of my favorites too, the ship that they're on is called Nebuchadnezzar. Why do you think
Right, the ship. Yeah, listen, I gave the whole class on the Matrix. I used to run many years ago. I haven't done this in at least 10 years, but I used to do like a whole seminar, like a day seminar on the Matrix from a Jewish perspective, because there's so much. Not that the Wachowskis who made the movie are Jewish, they're not. I don't think it was deliberate, but there's so many elements in there that are so clearly have Jewish influence, or at least overlap, align with what Kabbalistic sources say. It's pretty amazing. And so you'll find a lot of the symbolism in the movie, of course, is biblical, right? The final human city is called Zion. That's amazing, and the ship that they're on is the Nebuchadnezzar. And many of these, one of the characters in the later movies is called Seraph, right? Like who's one of these angels. The Seraphim is a class of angels in the Torah. And so there's a lot of this. And even Neo himself, I mean, the whole point of that movie, the whole point of the film is just a sci-fi dystopian version of the Mashiach story, of the Messiah. And Neo is essentially playing the role of the Messiah.
Yeah, the one.
Right, exactly. He's the one, the chosen one, the anointed one. That's what Messiah literally means. In Hebrew, Mashiach just means the anointed one.
So do you know that the Wachowski brothers did not write the script for The Matrix for the first movie?
I don't think I knew that. I mean, I've heard different things that they got the script from somebody else, but
Yeah, so they actually apparently it was stolen. Sophia Stewart submitted the script in a science fiction writing contest in the 80s. Never heard back. And then in the late 90s, she's at the movie theater and is like, wait a minute, that's my movie. She's watching it
interesting.
and realizing.
I've heard rumors about it. I've never really looked into it in depth. But.
Yeah, I heard her speak. I'm in a number of masterminds, and she spoke at one of the masterminds I was a part of called Metal. And it was really compelling what she was explaining. And also, this I think you'll find interesting, that the Matrix and the Terminator movies were correlated. Like they were different time frames.
Mm-hmm.
And
I've heard that theory too.
yeah, so she wrote that into her script, that the Terminator was earlier in time, the Matrix was much later, and yeah, that John Connor was Neo or something. I forget exactly the details of it, but it's pretty fascinating. So
it's interesting. There's a lot of theories out there. Now it's been popular to talk about connecting John Wick to the Matrix stories, and same actor, right? Keanu Reeves and Lawrence Fishburne as well. So some people try to tie in John Wick into the Matrix universe. It's interesting. There's a lot of theories, a lot of fan theories.
yeah,
Who knows? Yeah.
I think it's a really great allegory to how this illusory world we're living in is just a video game. Essentially, it's a movie, it's a play, it's none of it's real. We're just we're acting as if it's hyper realistic, so we forget that we're in this illusion.
The mind makes it real, right? So it might as well be real because we have no other, nothing else to go by. So is it possible that we're in a simulation? Sure. So I gave a class on that too. I think it was one of the more popular ones on my channel about Torah simulation theory, of looking at simulation theory from a Torah perspective. And I think it fits. I mean, a lot of what our sages said about this world being an illusory world. This world isn't real. This world is a dream world, right? Our sages said all these things. They could be quotes from the Matrix, but they can also be quotes from the Talmud and the Midrash. That this world is only a hallway, and the real world, the banquet hall, is somewhere else, and that this life is only transient and a blink of an eye. King David said this life is like a blink of an eye, and not the real world. And it's Plato's allegory of the cave as well, the shadows on the wall. And it's an ancient idea, right? It didn't, it's not, it wasn't first suggested by the Matrix. It's a very, very ancient idea. And that we recognize that ultimately there's some higher reality outside of this cosmos that we are in.
Yeah. Yeah. Some of the more popular movies and books are just a repetition of something from hundreds of years ago. I was surprised to hear, for example, that The Alchemist is based on a true story of a Jew from hundreds of years ago who lived in Krakow, Poland. He was very poor, and he had this repeating dream to go to Prague, and the Charles Bridge was essentially underneath the Charles Bridge was a treasure that he needed to dig up. And sure enough, he went. Finally, after this kept bothering him, he kept getting the recurring dream over and over again. He finally, went all the way to Prague, and there was a guarded bridge, and he tried to go in the middle of the night and not get caught, but he did get caught. And the soldier who caught him asked why he was there, and he just told him the truth. He said, I had this dream that there's buried treasure under here, and he's like, how ridiculous. I have a dream that in Krakow, Poland, there's a treasure buried under some poor guy's stove in his home.
Yeah.
And of course, he knew that was a message for him. And so
Right.
He got let go. He went back to Krakow, dug under the stove. Sure enough, there was a large treasure there.
Right.
And to this day, there's a huge synagogue. I don't know if it's huge, but there's a synagogue that's still standing called the Isaac Synagogue that he paid
Yeah, it's a popular.
with some of his treasure.
Right.
Amazing.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's a very well-known story.
Yeah.
Incredible.
So what are some of your favorite books or movies that are maybe science fiction or that are fantasy or whatever that have mystical Jewish kind of biblical secrets or truisms buried in them for us?
Because I think you can find those things everywhere, right? It's a lot of the same like archetypes, and people like to point out whether in Star Wars, for example, a lot of the kind of Jewish elements in Star Wars, where the Force is almost like just another word for this godly energy, the Shekhinah that imbues the physical world and gives you power. And Yoda, in Hebrew, Yodea, the one who knows in Hebrew. Yoda literally means the knowledgeable one in Hebrew. So you'll find a lot of these terms. Of course, much has been said about the Emperor Palpatine and his resemblance to Hitler, and the stormtroopers, of course, and the Nazis. And so there's all that in Star Wars. You have it in Avatar, right? James Cameron. So Terminator.
Yeah, the
Avatar.
Tree of Life and
yeah, the Tree of Life. Iowa, of course. Iowa just happens to have the same letters as the ineffable name of God in Judaism. Right? Same 4 letters. And again, a lot of that same kind of mystical understanding of really souls and bodies. That's really the theme of being able to kind of download your consciousness into another being. And it's just like reincarnation all over again, really, and resurrection. And so you'll find a lot of these themes in many movies and books. And I think one of my favorite movies is Interstellar. Great movie. Also, sci-fi on the one hand, but I think very mystical, spiritual on the other. And the themes of love and interconnectivity and time dilation, right? How time is really almost like a construct, and we think that it's something so we're so sure of our clocks, but really it's not. Time is quite relative, and that's really what Judaism has always said. In Judaism, time is always relative. And the Torah gives the Sanhedrin the power to proclaim a new month and to proclaim the holidays. And we can change, the Jewish hour and the Jewish minute change. We have a shazmanit, right? Over the course of the year, the definition of an hour in Judaism and Jewish law changes, interestingly. And time is very relative. In Jewish law, time is not concrete. The holidays are on different days of the year, every year. It can be earlier, it can be later, it can be cold, it can be warm. And we have this 19-year cycle where we have lunar months but solar years. And so every 19 years, we stay in sync with the sun so that we don't fall behind. But our months are lunar. And so it's an amazing thing. The Jewish system of time is actually quite incredible. And the themes of time, the Garden of Eden in Hebrew, like, what does that actually mean? What does the Garden of Eden mean? What is Eden? Eden in Hebrew is something delightful, a pleasure. But in Aramaic, which is closely related, it's like the mirror language to Hebrew and uses the same letters. In Aramaic, Eden means time. It was a garden of time. It was an island in time. And so there's something really interesting about time. And in Jewish law, time is quite just like it would be in quantum physics, time is very relative. And we almost have the power to manipulate time in Jewish law. And so Interstellar, I love for that.
So time is part of the illusion. In Kabbalah, they teach that time, space, and motion are all illusion. And in the Interstellar, when he's in the Tesseract, and able to interact with different time frames and send messages back in time to his daughter, that reminded me, the Tesseract is actually, I first heard of that word in the book, A Wrinkle in Time, which I read as a kid. And there was one concept from that science fiction book that really kind of, I don't know, stuck in my craw. It felt really weird to me that these stars sons, basically, were consciousness that could incarnate as what looked like human beings. And they took these kids who were the protagonists in the book on this journey, and they were stars, but here they were in human form. And now that makes a lot more sense, because after reading the Tanya and understanding that everything is consciousness, there's nothing independent of God, everything is made of God, and therefore a rock has consciousness, a table has consciousness. Why wouldn't a planet or a star?
Yeah. Yeah, you'll find particularly in medieval era Jewish texts, this understanding that the stars and planets have some kind of consciousness, certainly not human consciousness, but definitely some kind of divine energy. There are even some sources that relate the stars and planets to various angels. And that's common not just in Jewish texts, but in all texts from medieval and even ancient times. You can say that everything has some level of consciousness, not the same level of consciousness, right? So in Judaism, we basically have, again, 4 levels of creation, right? The very bottom is called the domem, which is inanimate matter. And then above that is tzemach or tzameach, which is plant life. And then above that is animal life, Baalei Chaim, or the high level. And then the highest level of consciousness of life is the human, the medaber, right? Literally the speaking being. So we kind of divide everything up into those 4. And there are transitions between. Interesting. The Arizal, again, will say that there's something that's between rock and plant. What's between domem and tzemach? What do you have in nature that's not quite rock, not quite plant? And he brings the example of corals. He even uses the word corals. His corals look like rocks, but they're actually alive. Right? So they're kind of like plants and rocks. And then he says, well, what's the transition from what do you have that's between plant and animal? What is it that's kind of like a plant, but also kind of like an animal? And he brings the example of the carnivorous plants. We have Venus flytraps and pitcher plants that actually eat. They eat bugs, and they can eat even little critters and rodents sometimes. So you have plants that can eat, that are like animals, that are carnivorous, that are heterotrophic. So that's between plant and animal. And then the Arizal says, well, what's between animal and human? What is it that has kind of both? And incredibly, he says it's 500 years ago, long before Charles Darwin. And he says that apes are between Chai and Medaber. So the Arizal already 500 years before suggested, not that he spoke about evolution through random mutations. Of course, we're talking about it from a godly, 100% God-driven perspective and God-controlled perspective, but that there are almost like transition species that are in-betweens. And the Arizal says that things can reincarnate through all the levels. So a person can reincarnate in an animal or in a plant or even in an inanimate object, even in water or in stone. So but not the entire soul, not that necessarily the whole human soul isn't reincarnated in stone, but certain sparks of holiness, certain aspects of the soul that need rectification.
So somebody could reincarnate as a cat or a dog because they went off the path in a human life. Yeah. Somebody.
One part of their soul, yeah. A part of their soul could reincarnate, a particular spark or a particular aspect that needs rectification.
Like one example that comes to mind, I heard about the Baba Sali. I love the Baba Sali. So he had such amazing stories, like miracles. I love hearing the stories about him. So there was one where there was a cat that kept coming and visiting and waiting for him to pay attention to him. And it finally got his attention. And then he told it 3 times in Hebrew, you are forgiven, you are forgiven, you are forgiven. And then the cat immediately runs out into traffic and gets hit and killed by a car.
Wow. Yeah, there are incredible stories like that. Yeah, absolutely. There are definitely incredible stories like that of reincarnation, even in our days. So, yeah.
I know we're running over time here. Gosh, I had so many questions. I wanted to. We could go for an hour more, but I want to respect your time here. Maybe we'll do a part 2 at some point. But
God willing.
Yeah. So what would be I don't know, the wisdom nugget that you want to most leave our listener or viewer with?
Um, I think just that we have to recognize that the world is going through a transition that hasn't happened in probably ever, when it comes to not just geopolitically, but even more with technology, with what AI is doing. So it's fitting we spoke about the Matrix and Terminator, but it almost seems like the robot apocalypse is upon us, and it can go in a really good way, it can go in a really bad way. Hopefully the good, but we have to recognize that the world as we know it is essentially coming to an end, right? And we're all going to be questioning what is our place in the world and what makes us human. I think that's going to be the big question that everybody's going to talk about once these AI robots come out. And how are we different, right? If these machines can make music and can make art as good as, if not better than, what we can do. And some people will say, no, it's not real. It's just aggregating from other things. But so do we, right? Any human artist is not just taking it out of nowhere. It's coming from things we've seen and learned.
Yeah, we all stand on the shoulders of giants.
Exactly. So we're all absorb information growing up and eventually become producers. And AI is kind of doing the same super, super fast.
Yeah.
And so what is our place in the cosmos, and how are we different from robots? And as a biologist, I've had this question for a long time, even long before AI is, even going back to my university days and playing with muscles and nerves and the electrical conductivity. And we are electrical beings. We are ultimately electrical machines as well. So what makes us different than an AI robot machine? And so those big questions are going to come up. And I think now is the time to really reevaluate who we are as human beings. What does it mean to be human? How do we connect to God in all of this? What is the purpose of what is the purpose of our lives? And to return to kind of reconnect with our souls. We can't just keep living as bodies anymore.
Yeah.
Because so return bodies that are
return more Hebrew. The word for return in Hebrew is teshuvah.
That's right. It's the same word for repentance and return in Hebrew. Teshuvah means both repentance and return, a returning to God, of coming back to your godly spark, of recognizing who you truly are inside, not just an electrical machine, because we are all electrical machines, not much different from robots.
A human computer.
Who we are inside.
A dumb terminal connected to the supercomputer. If it's just
who are we inside?
There's no utility to the dumb terminal.
Right. So I think that's the big question, is for everybody to start thinking about these things of who am I as a human being, and what is my place in the cosmos, is what is my connection to to God, to the big picture. Who am I? Where am I? And what's the world going to look like in 10 to 15, 20 years? What kind of world do we want? What kind of world do we want to create? Are we going to be able to bring about the long prophesied kingdom of heaven on earth, a harmonious era where the whole world kind of is united, and we have world peace? Like Isaiah said, like a lot of the prophets said, can we create that world together? We're going to have to work together. The world is transitioning. We have to reunite if we can hope to ever have that peaceful, harmonious world.
Yeah. I recently, in the last couple of years, heard that the word apocalypse doesn't mean end of the world. In Greek, it actually refers to the lifting of the veil.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Oh, wow.
That's where we're heading. All will be revealed. Yes, very soon. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, you're an inspiration. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're an inspiration. Thank you so much for being on the show. I'd love for you to share your website, your YouTube channel for our listeners.
Absolutely. Thank you, Stephan. Really appreciate it. It's been great.
Yeah. So what's the website address, and what is your YouTube channel URL?
Oh, yeah. You can, the website's a little harder to spell. It's in Hebrew, maimachronim.com. You can also just write in my name. efipalvanov.com works probably easier. EFIPALVANOV.com. and the YouTube channel, just my name, at Efraim Palvanov. And if you search Efraim, usually I'm the first Efraim that comes up. And and happy to discuss these ideas with anybody who likes. My contact information's online on my website. And
Okay, thank you so much, and have a great week. We'll catch you on the next episode. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer, signing off.
If you want to hear more conversations like this on practical Jewish mysticism, then I recommend episode 134 with Rabbi Daniel Lapin, episode 140 with David Guillaume, episode 400 with Rabbi Chaim Miller, and episode 507 with Rabbi Pinchas Taylor. Also, I invite you to check out the show notes, transcript, action-based checklist, and all the URLs mentioned in this interview with Efraim Palvanov at getyourselfoptimized.com/520. If you enjoyed the conversation, I encourage you to share this episode and, more importantly, the entire show, Get Yourself Optimized, with a friend. Change your life and help me spread the light. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Get Yourself Optimized. Nearly a decade ago, I started a journey that completely transformed my personal life and my business. Now I'm taking on a very select number of high-caliber coaching clients and personally helping them optimize their lives. I have limited spots, so if you're interested, go now to getyourselfoptimized.com and apply for one-on-one coaching or for our high-level mastermind. By the way, if you have any questions or comments whatsoever, email me at host@getyourselfoptimized.com. See you next week.